A new effort to stop Sharia law in Texas is facing some pushback. Several East Texas lawmakers have joined the Sharia-Free Texas caucus, which it says aims to address the teachings of Islam. KLTV7's Michael Richardson spoke with one of the caucus's founders and a member of the East Texas Muslim community. Take a look.
Over 30 members of the Texas House have signed on to the Sharia-Free Texas caucus, including Representative Brett Money. The Greenville Republican is concerned over what he says is a growing Islamic influence in the state. He wants to ensure there is no parallel legal system in Texas. Are there currently two parallel legal systems happening right now in Texas?
Islam, the Quran, and the books that they are teaching their children specifically say that the Quran and Islam is the Constitution.
The caucus is looking to, in part, advance legislation to prohibit Sharia practices that they say oppress women or incite violence against non-believers.
That means to me Muslim-free Texas is what they want to be, because Sharia and Islam and Muslims go hand in hand.
Anwar Khalifa says Sharia law constitutes religious rules Muslims such as himself live by, including taking care of family and electing representatives, and does not include oppressing women.
Part of Sharia law is you have to follow the rules of the country that you're in. That's Sharia law. So for me to follow Sharia, there is no parallel systems. I've got to follow the rules and the laws of this country.
If we're going to give the religious protections and privileges, then we need to ensure that they're adding those same things, those same values that are good for our society.
Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick has asked senators to look at ways to prevent Sharia law before the next legislative session, which starts in 2027. Michael Richardson, KLTV7 News.
The Pew Research Center says about 2/3 of adults in Texas identify as Christians, while 2% are Muslim. That survey is from 2023 to 2020.